The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio announced yesterday he is now running for president, seeking the Republican nomination for the 2016 presidential election. He says he is uniquely qualified. I think certainly he has a clear thirst for presidential power, we could say, Lewis, that he is very actively trying to quench, if you know what I mean.
Yes, very clever. Of course, you're referencing the State of the Union rebuttal, where he took the sip of the water in front of the camera, and it was very awkward.
How has he been polling? Mediocre. He's behind Ted Cruz. He's behind people who aren't even running yet, like Jeb Bush, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. If Jeb Bush announced, Marco Rubio would be very well positioned to take offense to when Jeb Bush marked himself down as Hispanic on his 2009 voter registration form. So certainly probably waiting anxiously for that. It's very interesting when you compare Hillary Clinton to Marco Rubio with laughably little experience. It's almost like he's done nothing. City commissioner of West Miami, Florida state congressman, and now U.S. senator. And I know this might be hard to believe given how disingenuous Rand Paul and Ted Cruz are, but Marco Rubio may be the most disingenuous of them all so far. He was supposed to be leading this big battle for immigration reform. He's done nothing. In fact, the entire thing blew up in his face. Marco Rubio is the most like Romney to me so far of the Republican candidates, in that he just stands for nothing. When you see Rubio, I get the same feeling as I did with Romney, which is this is a political opportunist who's I don't feel anything in terms of what this person represents politically.
Yeah, I think he is. I think it's just all about the position and the power, most likely. Then again, I guess we could say that about most people who are running for that seat.
He had this plan to help the poor, and he talked about, oh, I want to help the poor. I'm a compassionate Republican who cares about the poor. But he's pretty limited in terms of how he could actually do that to ways that the entire GOP would accept, which are mostly things that would actually hurt the poor. Look at his ideas around the tax code. He had this plan to combine some modest middle-class tax benefits with huge tax cuts for high earners, pretty similar to George W. Bush's first tax cut back in 2001. And conservatives said, oh, yeah, we don't really like this distribution. And Rubio responded not by saying, oh, well, this is what we're doing to help the poor, not even the poor, the middle class. He instead added even more regressive tax cuts, helping the richest of all Americans. It was a joke of a plan with no connection to reality, no economic viability either.
No, but it's a plan that, well, we know who his supporters are. We know where he needs the money to come from, right?
Yeah, that's certainly the type of plan that big-time Republican insiders and funders would like. I think that there's no question Marco Rubio is uniquely unqualified to even discuss serious economic issues. To start with, we should ask the current suite of presidential candidates on the Republican side, how old is the Earth? Is climate change real? And are humans a factor in climate change? He should just, to start, tackle those questions and give us straightforward answers if he's able.
We know what his answers will be. His answers will be the same as most people in his position. He will side with business. He will side with his donors and his sponsors.
Immediately after announcing his candidacy for president, Marco Rubio did an interview with NPR. He was interviewed by Steve Inskeep and immediately saying two things that are a disaster. I mean, already just taking disastrous positions. He said that he would, if he can, reverse the direction we're going in terms of rebuilding diplomatic relations with Cuba. Marco Rubio, one of these Cuban Americans who is still very, very much against any kind of diplomatic relations with Cuba, easing of sanctions on Cuba, even though it makes perfect sense. The Cuban embargo is completely hypocritical, as we've talked about so many times. Marco Rubio saying if he were elected president, he would immediately reverse what he can with regard to the increase in relations with Cuba, and also saying that he would do whatever he can to reverse the agreement with Iran, which doesn't even make sense in part because as president, he wouldn't just be able to say, oh, put sanctions back on, right? On day one, he says this would be an issue, not even something he would really be able to do on day one. But let's just take him at his word, Lewis. Look at what he wants to do as president. Disaster.
Yeah, he wants to halt progress. He wants to reverse it. He wants to regress. And I think that's the direction that a lot of people who are running for Republican, in the Republican primary would do. I mean, they just want the opposite of progress.
Let's go from Marco Rubio to another Republican primary candidate, Rand Paul. Rand Paul is now making promises that he obviously can't keep. One of the things that Rand Paul has been saying as part of his very new, his 1 week old platform for Republican candidate for president is that if he were elected, he would immediately end NSA mass surveillance. He said, quote, "The president created this vast dragnet by executive order, and as president on day one, I will immediately end this unconstitutional surveillance. I believe we can have liberty and security, and I will not compromise your liberty for a false sense of security. Not now, not ever." Let's forget for a second that it was a president, but not this president, who started most of these surveillance programs. It was George W. Bush. President Obama certainly having a role in scaling up and reauthorizing the Patriot Act and NSA surveillance, no doubt. But the Obama blaming element of it is a little bit tired, to be quite frank. Let's talk about whether he could do this, right? Saying your phone records are yours, the phone records of law-abiding citizens are none of the damn business of the government. This is grandiosity at its most grandiose. The idea that Rand Paul can just shut this whole thing down is absurd, particularly since much of it was going on without the White House's involvement or knowledge in the first place. This is such a blatant promise that Rand Paul couldn't possibly keep.
Two things. First, it's not too different from Mitt Romney promising every college graduate in the country a job.
Right.
I think, but it's commonplace now for presidential candidates to make promises they can't keep. But also at the same time, I think that a lot of people don't understand that the president can't just do anything they want. I think that's why so many people hate Obama, because they think he can just snap his fingers and make anything happen. And it's not that simple.
Should we be reinterpreting campaign promises now simply as desires? So when we hear President Obama say, "I will shut down Guantanamo Bay," should we just say, okay, that's how he has to say it, but what he means is he would like to shut down Guantanamo Bay? When Rand Paul says, "I will shut down NSA surveillance on day one of my presidency," should we be synthesizing that and saying, okay, what he means is if he could simply do whatever he wanted with no oversight whatsoever, this is what he would like to do?
It's gotten to the point where that's how I interpret it. It's just an idea. So I think it would be, I think it would be good for voters to interpret it that way.
The problem, of course, is that it makes us question whether he knows what he even would have the ability to do or authority to do as president. More pragmatic, maybe, would have been to say, listen, I would push for a new law that requires companies to disclose data surveillance. If they don't, they can be held liable for it as if data were stolen because it needs to be disclosed. Let's declassify the surveillance techniques, not necessarily all of the data. A lot of people are against this type of surveillance, in part because they don't know what is the policy, what is the technique being used. So we would have, I would have at least a much different reaction if I heard Rand Paul making more pragmatic and specific promises, like some of these.
And that would have been a huge mistake because you just introduced nuance. And when you do that, you lose everybody. So what he did was very simple. It was to the point, and it was a powerful statement. And I guess, he thinks that's what works, and maybe it does.
There's no chance that Rand Paul is actually going to be the next president of the United States. So most of this discussion might be moot, but it's still relevant for whoever does become the next president. On the discussion of NSA surveillance, tell us specifically what you would do, and mandatory disclosure, not of the data, but of who is collecting data, right? Is Verizon giving your data to the government? Disclose that. And also, what are the techniques being used for data collection? Just so everybody knows what the playing field is. That I think is not too much to ask. Shocking news. Rand Paul actually right about something since declaring that he is running for president. He's been wrong and just bogus and completely disconnected from reality. I mean, flabbergasting, truly, on most things that he has said he would do or would like to do, and just the campaign implosions, embarrassment after embarrassment. But broken clocks are often still right twice a day. And that seems to be the best analogy for Rand Paul, who is in the middle of this completely abortive campaign launch. He explained, Lewis, this is exciting, that the status quo of drug laws in the U.S. actually further a culture of violence. And this is completely accurate. He said we have a flawed criminal drug legislation system. This is a big factor behind urban conflict. It's a big factor in prison overcrowding. He attacked narcotics laws during an address in Las Vegas. And I completely agree with what he's saying. Quote, the war on drugs has created a culture of violence and puts police in an impossible situation. It has fostered tension in our inner cities. There is an undercurrent of unease in our country. He also said punishments are too harsh for drug-related crimes. How can we disagree? He's spot on there.
Now he's speaking our language, and we've heard this from him before. This is one of the few things we agree with him on. And I think if he were to push this and perhaps make this his primary message, I think that could get him a lot of traction. Even
saying that there's a disproportionate racial application of a lot of these drug laws. Quote, if you look at statistics, white people are using drugs at the same rate as black people, yet look at the difference in incarceration rates. So absolutely, not to mention that having drugs be illegal creates more dangerous situations around the dealing of drugs, right? Think about the involvement of guns, the necessity for street deals, back alley drug dealing. Because of the illegal nature of drugs, millions of people have the burden of a criminal record because of drugs, which then puts them in terrible positions with regard to getting a job, and that creates a loop that can get them back to crime. So it's great that Rand Paul is not wrong on every issue, but at the same time, saying one logical thing is a little too low of a standard for me anyway, when I think about who to support for president.
Right. If it's going to be between Rand Paul and a Democratic nominee that you, let's just say, hate, are you going to pick Rand Paul?
Well, let's evaluate which candidate has more in common with me in terms of the issues. And so far, I've at least found one area of agreement with Rand Paul. But
I think the Democrat, no matter how much you dislike them, you would probably find many more.
If it's more than one, we would already be ahead of that. Yeah, obviously we're going to continue to report on what Rand Paul's platform is, and we'll take it piece by piece, as I always like to do, Lewis. Tweet us about this, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We depend on our audience for funding this program. Today's new member of the day is Ronald McGregor, and you can join Ronald, vote with your dollars, support independent media by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Rick Santorum is now bragging about how big of a bigot he is. He's the former Pennsylvania Republican senator, former Republican presidential candidate, a storied history of unstoppable and unabashed bigotry and ignorance, and he seems to really be proud of it. Rick Santorum went to a meeting with Iowa state legislators a couple days ago, and it was recorded by the Iowa conservative blog Caffeinated Thoughts, and he was bragging about how he has proved his leadership by how strongly he opposes striking down these sodomy bans. He likes sodomy bans. He likes state laws against same-sex marriage. And he said that if we allow these laws to continue being eliminated, that life as we know it is going to be in jeopardy. He is completely out of his mind. This is the same Rick Santorum who opposes same-sex marriage at every opportunity, who's talked about not wanting to make black people, or maybe it was blah people's lives better. He's talked about how contraception is a dangerous thing. And here he is bragging about how he's really anti-gay.
I've been through that firestorm. I can go back 13 years when I was in the United States Senate and stood up and said, if the Supreme Court decides a case this way, then all these bad things are going to start happening. And I said we would have same-sex marriage in this country in 10 years. I was wrong. It was 5 years. And I was put through a national ringer like no one had been put through, and I've been put through over and over and over again. Because I'm not going to back down from what I believe is the right course for our country.
No matter what happens, Lewis, no matter what states decide, no matter what the Supreme Court ultimately decides, maybe in June, maybe later, Rick Santorum is going to keep being anti-gay no matter what, and he's proud of it.
He is. And, if that's your mission in life and you think it's a godly or a holy mission, then I guess he deserves to be proud, although pride is foolish in some ways anyway. But this is what his fans want to hear.
Why, Lewis? Why is it so important to him to be against same-sex marriage? Because he's worried, he fearmongers that bad things will happen.
He fearmongers, but I think that for many people like Rick Santorum, this is the battle. I mean, this is the one you have to win. This is, all the chips are on the table right here. And this is, a pivotal moment in our country's history.
Right, because when we look at other states that have a long record now, over a decade of having legalized same-sex marriage, bad things happen. Like Massachusetts, for example, which has had gay marriage for more than a decade. Massachusetts tops the country in 4th and 8th grade math and reading skills. It has some of the best education in the country. Reading levels like Singapore and Japan rather than Bulgaria, which is at the same level as Mississippi, for example. Massachusetts with the highest level of first trimester prenatal care, the 3rd lowest infant mortality rate, 2nd highest rate of child access to medical and dental care, 6th highest for life expectancy, 2nd lowest teen birth rate. It's terrible what has happened in Massachusetts since same-sex marriage was legalized.
But I think you're forgetting, if your kid sees a guy kiss another guy in Massachusetts, their life is ruined, right? You forgot about that.
Find the metric that proves gay marriage led to bad things in Massachusetts. I invite you to do it. Earthquakes used to be pretty rare in Oklahoma. Up until 2008, Oklahoma had an average of 1 or 2 3.0 or greater magnitude earthquakes per year. That's not much at all, Lewis. 1 to 2 of these earthquakes per year.
No, that seems like a small amount. Of course, more than we're used to in the Northeast, but yes.
In 2009, there were all of a sudden 20 3.0 or greater magnitude earthquakes in Oklahoma. In 2010, that number increased to 42. And last year, in 2014, that number was 585, nearly 3 times the rate of California. William Ellsworth, who's a research geologist at the United States Geological Survey, said, quote, "We can say with virtual certainty that the increased seismicity in Oklahoma has to do with recent changes in the way that oil and gas are being produced." Now, upon hearing that, you might think, oh, it's because of fracking. It is not. It is not. Some of these larger earthquakes are being caused by disposal wells where there's billions of barrels of brackish water that's brought up for drilling oil and gas. That water is pumped back into the ground, okay? And that is a procedure, it's a technique which is being associated increasingly with these earthquakes. So fracking poses its own set of risks, but here what we're talking about is this water disposal method. Now, there are some who oppose the idea of climate change science on religious grounds. They say, listen, God would never create a planet that humans could so drastically alter. We have increasingly more and more evidence that those individuals are wrong. The local economies in Oklahoma are hugely dependent on this oil and gas activity. So I don't know what it is that needs to be done. We know there will be economic forces at play, but the data seem to be irrefutable at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen that type of seismic activity increase that much anywhere else for natural reasons. It's pretty shocking, and I doubt we're going to see any changes over there.
No, particularly because of the financial factors
right.
at play. You say, well, David, why do you have to dispose of water like this? You could do the oil and gas harvesting, but dispose of the water in a different way. Wastewater injection, which is what's being done here, is the cheapest method of disposing of waste from these activities. That basically tells you everything you need to know.
The companies here that are fracking and drilling, they're the ones with all of the leverage. Oklahoma is completely dependent on them. And so they get to do whatever they want.
We've talked about these situations in which pharmacists in some states can refuse to fill prescriptions based on conscience objections, right? If they have religious or moral objections to certain medications, they can say, I'm not going to fill this prescription for you. And this has happened in a really tragic and truly appalling way for a woman who had suffered a miscarriage, was unable to get the medically necessary drugs that her doctor ordered because the local Walmart pharmacist refused to fill it. About 5 weeks into her pregnancy, Brittany Cartret was told by her doctor that her child had not made it. And to avoid serious health consequences that can come with a miscarriage, you get two options. You have an invasive procedure which surgically removes the contents of the uterus, or you can do the same thing via a pill, which has the same effect but is less invasive. Understandably, she chose the pill. Unfortunately, she had a serious hard time trying to obtain that pill. She went to Walmart where the pharmacist refused to help her. Cartret talked about this incident that happened in Georgia, spoke about it with Georgia news station WGXA, quote, "So we made the decision not to do a DNC, which is that first invasive procedure I mentioned, and to get medicine. So he said, I'm going to give you this medicine, you'll take it, and it will help you to pass naturally so that you don't have to have the more invasive route. The doctor's office called the Milledgeville Walmart to fill the prescription. They were told no and not given a reason. Quote, so we found another place to fill it, but I still had to go up and get another prescription. So when I went up to the original Walmart, she asked if I had any questions about this prescription. I said, no, I don't, but I do have a question about this other one. She looks at my name and she says, oh, well, I couldn't think of a valid reason why you would need this prescription. Mind you, this is a pharmacist, not a doctor. The pharmacist says, I can't think of a reason why you need this prescription. The unidentified pharmacist took it upon herself to refuse to fill the prescription that the doctor told the patient they needed. And the answer is all about personal beliefs. The drug is also used to induce abortions, and the pharmacist appears to have taken issue with giving out the drug, I guess in case that the woman was lying and was actually trying to have it for an abortion. I don't know. In any case, disgusting.
And this is actually legal there, right?
Yeah, Georgia's one of 6 states that have these conscience clauses, which let pharmacists not dispense medicine that they object to personally or religiously.
And, I think there's a lot of gray area there. There could be plenty of situations in which this type of confusion could lead to someone dying. I mean, it could happen, right?
Of course, yeah. When you open up when you give pharmacists this discretion to say, I don't want to give you this drug because I disagree with the method that is on paper, or with the condition that you're using this to treat, or I disagree with the conditions that this drug could be used to treat, even if they're off-label or even if it's not as prescribed. This is just a dangerous amount of latitude that's being provided. I actually think that the pharmacist should really take a stand. Forget about not dispensing the medication. You should be refusing to even work at pharmacies that carry the drug, right? If you truly object because of your religion, because of your conscience to this medication, don't work there and refuse to give it out. Your employer is stocking or making available this medication. You shouldn't be working there at all to really exercise your conscience and religious beliefs.
Yeah, it's an interesting system we have with pharmacies in this country. I mean, shouldn't the physicians who write these prescriptions have access to this medication? Should they be able to give it to you directly? I'm not really sure why we have the system we currently have.
It's pathetic. We have a system in place for determining what drugs are legal. We all have many complaints about the FDA, but it is a putative system. And if a drug is legal, a doctor is allowed to decide if that is the appropriate drug. To inject the personal beliefs of the pharmacist you happen to by chance have to deal with and allow that to be a potential impediment for a doctor to get their patients the drugs that they determine are the right ones and are approved by the FDA is ridiculous.
Right. And it's the states that are deciding whether or not that is legal to do in each individual case. Of course, I doubt there are many medical experts involved in those decisions.
Yeah, increasingly, the problem we have in this country is that we have non-experts making laws about science and medicine and education, often influenced by their personal religious beliefs. It is very, very scary, and we need to be very, very vigilant about what's going on. We saw what happened with the textbooks in Texas. We've been following that. And it's very scary when religion, this sort of Christian version of Sharia law, starts to take hold in the United States. We'll take a break. Make sure to join us on our Reddit sub, davidpakman.com/Reddit, Reddit, where you can chat with us and discuss this and any other stories from the show with fellow David Pakman Show viewers.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Lewis, the future is approaching. By 2017, there will be a commercially available robot chef, which will be able to cook up to 2,000 meals by itself. It'll be able to adjust temperature, stir, pour, add ingredients, all that type of stuff. It will require custom equipment. It won't be a robot that can just do this in any kitchen. The entire kitchen will have to be properly equipped for this robot. 2,000 different dishes, which you will be able to select even from your smartphone before you get home. And your cooking robot, your robot chef, will begin to cook dinner for you. What do you think about this? Interesting?
I think it is interesting. I think I'm very skeptical. I think that a lot can go wrong and you're going to be very limited in what you can do and eat. And of course, like you said,
2,000 recipes, though. That's not limited.
But your entire kitchen has to be geared towards allowing this robot to do its thing. And that may mean that it makes it very hard for you to cook in your own kitchen, maybe impossible.
It's possible, yeah. I mean, the robotic hands will have 20 motors, 24 joints, and 129 sensors. It's like a super involved, intricate robot. And maybe the infrastructure on which it has to be built would make it so that this kitchen is not too easy to use if you want to manually cook something.
I think that would probably be the case. Now, it is interesting, and I wonder how much it would cost. Is it going to be cost effective? Should you just go out and eat instead? But, I think that a lot of Americans have, unfortunately, not learned to cook, not spent a lot of time in the kitchen. And I don't see this making it any better. I mean, I think everyone should know how to cook.
Yeah, of course. And I enjoy cooking, but sometimes it's getting late and my schedule gets all mixed up. And when I get home, it is easier to order delivery through Seamless or something like that. So maybe this is an interesting alternative. It is kind of obvious to expect stuff like this, though, right? Intelligent homes, you can control your lights, locks, your temperature already remotely via mobile applications. We've had the Roomba robotic vacuums for a long time. I don't think that this is, people push back against the veracity of autonomous vehicles. And I still think that eventually it's something we're going to have. This seems like something far more obvious, that the home will become increasingly automated in the next 5 years.
Probably. I would much rather see that Star Trek type food creation system.
That's like a matter compiler, right? Where it can just build stuff from the ground up at the molecular level. Right.
I think we are obviously very far from that technology. However, that would be much better. But okay, I'd love to. I would eat a meal created by this robot.
Do you welcome this general type of technological change? I mean, aside from you would eat the meal, do you welcome the further automation and use of technology in homes? Or do you worry, like some people do with every new technology, that it can be used to commit crimes or to somehow hurt the homeowner?
It probably could hurt the homeowner, but I still support this. I think we are advancing, and this is a step that we need to take to do that. And so while I would not purchase one of these robot chefs, yes, I do support it.
Yesterday, we talked about Hillary Clinton running for president, and I said, I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not expressing my support for Hillary Clinton's politics. I am merely saying that on paper, she is one of the most qualified presidential candidates in a long time. It doesn't seem like anybody listened to what I had to say, Lewis, because I got emails and tweets and Facebook posts and hundreds of YouTube comments saying, David, how can you support Hillary Clinton's politics? I don't understand how you can do it. Why didn't anybody listen to what I said, Lewis, that it was not an endorsement of Hillary Clinton's political views?
Maybe you just didn't stress that enough. Yeah, I think it was maybe one or two sentences. Maybe you needed to go on about that a little bit more.
Well, let's talk about Hillary Clinton's political views. Truth Out has a very interesting piece which argues that real progressives should not support Hillary Clinton because she's not actually progressive. And it goes through 5 areas. Let's go through them. First is foreign policy. And they say, as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton was reportedly one of the most hawkish members of President Obama's cabinet, pushing for the 2009 troop surge in Afghanistan, pushing for U.S. intervention in Libya. She has also been a vocal proponent of the same drone war that has led to the deaths of 2,400 civilians. Not a surprise to most people, Lewis. We've discussed that, particularly on foreign policy, Hillary Clinton is far more to the middle or right, however you define it, probably more to the right than President Obama, certainly more to the right than her husband and former President Bill Clinton. Foreign policy, not really the area to look for to tout Hillary Clinton's progressive credentials.
Not at all. And her husband, I think he made a lot of mistakes when it came to foreign policy. She might repeat that.
Number 2, the economy. Hillary Clinton has long nurtured close ties to the financial sector, Truth Out writes. Over the course of her political career, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Citigroup have been among her top political donors, in addition to giving heavily to the Clinton Foundation. And in October of 2013, Hillary Clinton was paid $400,000 to speak at 2 Goldman Sachs events and delivered what was described as a reassuring message to the assembled bankers. We've talked about Hillary Clinton's relationship with Goldman Sachs for a long time. No question about it. Here, though, we have to be discerning. Is her relationship, how much worse or how much more in bed is she with these banksters than other candidates who would realistically have a shot at being president? And I think that's a key question, because ultimately, most candidates will take money from these corporations.
I think she is in bed with them as you can be, because if you want to be president, you need their help.
On the environment, as Grist magazine reported, during her tenure as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton took an active role in promoting hydrofracking worldwide through the global shale gas initiative. Clinton's State Department, and in some cases she personally, lobbied on behalf of companies like Chevron, intent on expanding the practice of fracking, particularly in countries like Bulgaria and Romania, where there was widespread public skepticism. Hillary Clinton, not known as the top environmentalist, that's for sure.
No, she is not. And, I guess we can't put her husband in that category either. They're somewhat similar there.
Civil liberties. In the Senate, Hillary Clinton voted for the Patriot Act as well as its subsequent reauthorization. And in an appearance in April of 2014 at the University of Connecticut, she defended NSA surveillance and she chastised whistleblower Edward Snowden, accusing him of supporting terrorism. I have to say on this one, how are we defining whistleblower? Edward Snowden revealed techniques that were legal, albeit by very sketchy means, but we need to talk a little bit about the definition of whistleblower. This one, for me, is less of a concern in context of what we're talking about. Many Democrats supported those things for political reasons. Not that that makes it okay, but it doesn't necessarily make Hillary Clinton stand out.
No, I mean, I think in the position she was in, her jobs over the years, it kind of makes sense that she would have this mentality about the surveillance culture.
And number 5, culture wars. In 2005, Hillary Clinton joined a bipartisan group of senators in signing on to the Workplace Religious Freedom Act, which, according to the ACLU, would have effectively legalized discrimination. Later the same year, she introduced a bill that would have made flag burning a felony. She has a long history of anti-video game demagoguery. She once called upon the Federal Trade Commission to investigate the Grand Theft Auto Hot Coffee mod, which modifies Grand Theft Auto San Andreas with a sexually explicit mini-game within the game. Certainly not the priorities I would want a progressive to have with regard to cultural and social issues. That's for damn sure.
And let's add that it doesn't really seem like she's a huge fan of marijuana legalization either.
Yeah, we are going to watch this very closely. I think for now we can talk about what Hillary Clinton has said in the past. Once we have more Democratic candidates, Lewis, we'll be able to more fully compare and contrast what her platform will be running for president to those of other Democrats, if she has Democratic challengers in a serious way.
Yes, but when I look at this list that we just covered, I see a history it basically looks like this whole time she's been setting herself up to receive massive amounts of money from every possible direction, from every possible industry, to help her win the presidency.
Well, many people would agree with exactly what you're saying, Lewis, and you can rest assured that this is going to be an ongoing topic of discussion. Let's take a break. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The New York Daily News is reporting that a 1-year-old boy died of a gunshot wound to the head over the weekend, and investigators believe it happened when a 3-year-old boy managed to get his hands on a loaded gun and fire a round, according to authorities. Investigators suspect that the 3-year-old accidentally fired the fatal round into the baby boy's head after discovering a handgun in Cleveland's East Side. It's a sad day for Cleveland, said the police chief. They have released that the 1-year-old victim was Braylon Robinson. Cops are trying to figure out exactly how the 3-year-old got access to this weapon, but Williams, the police chief, described the firearm as untended. Williams has not named the homeowner, but says that charges are likely here against the person responsible for the firearm. We haven't heard that too often, Lewis, when it comes to these shootings. Usually we hear an investigation is going on, no charges have been filed, and ultimately no charges are filed. But in this case, we hear from the police chief that, yes, they are very seriously looking at charges here and expect to file them against whoever is responsible for this gun.
Yes, someone should be held accountable, and it shouldn't be a 3-year-old. I think we can say that with certitude.
Yeah, if a 3-year-old shoots a 1-year-old dead, somewhere there's an adult responsible because the 3-year-old was not able to buy that weapon.
Without a doubt, yeah. And, it's frustrating to hear these stories because we know that nothing is really being done about this, and it happens all the time. And something needs to be done at the same time. I know that there are actual responsible gun owners out there who are equally frustrated when they hear these stories because they know every time they do, we get closer to laws that they would just not like to have implemented.
The chief also blasted gun culture. Quote, "This is a senseless loss of life for this city again, and it's directly related to guns. We need to really take a hard look at the things we're doing out there on the state, local, and national level to get some of these guns out of our communities because nothing good ever happens." He is, of course, taking heat as a gun grabber, and of course the police don't want you to have guns. They want to be the only ones with guns, which is kind of becoming a tired argument for me. This idea that we should look to the experts who deal with civilians with guns to see what they think. But then when we do, and they say we do have a gun culture problem, the reaction is, yeah, they want to be the only ones with guns. Of course they want nobody else to have guns.
Yeah, we are, it's the gun culture here it's going to be very difficult to change. And, the problems are social problems, but the only way to change it seems, is to make sure there are less guns or make sure that we are prosecuting people who negligently use them.
A school nurse at Wilson Middle School in the Carlisle area school district of Pennsylvania refused to provide medical treatment to an 8th grader who exercised her right not to stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance. After the Pledge of Allegiance, the student says she was berated by a school nurse. "Why don't you stand for the pledge?" The student said, "I have the right not to stand for it." fine, then leave. I have the right not to service you. The student said that the nurse shouted at her. According to some reports that have been filed, including one by the American Humanist Association, the girl left the nurse's office in tears and asked to call her parents. And the nurse showed up again and said she's not calling a parent until I have a long conversation with her. Now, this is where it gets even crazier. A guidance counselor eventually shows up and says you should really have some sympathy for the student, but incorrectly said that the student, if she chooses not to stand during the Pledge of Allegiance, she needs to stand in the hallway to wait until the Pledge of Allegiance has been completed, which of course is not true. The American Humanist Association said that a written apology is in order here, that it is absolutely untrue that a student who does not participate in the pledge needs to stand outside. This was clearly decided in the 1943 case, West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett, where the Supreme Court ruled that students cannot be compelled to salute the flag or say the Pledge of Allegiance, and there cannot be repercussions given to the student for not doing so. This is such a sad and ridiculous story of how this girl is being treated.
I think if you want a student or a child to be more patriotic and have a greater appreciation for this country and our freedoms, this is probably not the best method. This is probably not going to help your case.
Well, the rabid nationalism is a bad thing for the U.S. Take a look historically around the world and find me instances of rabid, explosive nationalism at this level of aggression that didn't turn sour. And I go back to a quote from President Dwight Eisenhower. I don't think the United States needs super patriots. We need patriotism honestly practiced by all of us. And we don't need these people who pretend to be more patriotic than you or anybody else. Couldn't say it better myself, Lewis. There is no ownership of patriotism that says you must stand for the Pledge of Allegiance or you do not qualify.
I mean, what is the next step away from this? Holding a gun to the student's head and saying, you know, pledge your allegiance now. I don't think we're too far away from that in this situation.
Yeah, tragic and distressing and just the absolute wrong direction. Schools have enough problems. The last thing we need is nurses refusing medical treatment because someone didn't stand for the flag. Let's talk about voicemails, which we can receive at our voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. We've had this discussion about what's worse, what is more cruel and unusual, or what is a harder punishment, death penalty, life in prison without parole. Here's one voicemail weighing in about it.
Hi, David. I'm calling regarding the topic, which is worse, prison or death penalty. And as somebody who has struggled for many decades with serious mental illness, may I tell you that no one has ever longed for prison. People have, in fact, longed for death. So, in my eyes, it is very clear which is worse, death or prison. It is absolutely prison that is worse.
All right, so there's one take on it. Send me your thoughts. Death, penalty, life in prison. The conversation continues. Today on the bonus show, observing evolution in cave crustaceans, an investigation into Rand Paul's online store. The troubles just don't stop for Rand Paul and his campaign. And a very strange felony hacking charge in Florida. Maybe not what you think. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. The bonus show, one of many member benefits, including commercial-free video and audio streams of the full show and the bonus show. Speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.